destination. No, it's about the journey. It ain't where you're headed, but it's how you grow. It ain't about no trophies, but getting back on your feet, walking in your glory. So come on, let's go. It's time for Michelle Speak. Yes, it is. Michelle Speaks. Alright, alright. It's time for Michelle Speaks. Ooh, I said Michelle Speaks.
Hello, 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 and welcome. It is Michelle Lawrence, and I am so excited to have an opportunity to come before you with Michelle Speaks and our first segment of Real Talk. And I couldn't have a better guest on Real Talk than my sister. And that's right, she is my sister, and it is Deidra Kendrix. Yes, Deidra Kendrix. I am so excited to have her join me on this kickoff, this launch of Real Talk. Welcome, sis.
Oh my God, it is my pleasure, and I miss you, and I'm still jazzing off of the song, but it is absolute pleasure, and you are indeed, like people, I feel like the term sis has become such a normalized colloquialism today, but you are my real sister.
I know that they don't get that, but it's okay, because to understand who we are,
this is true,
and to understand how Merlene and Thelma feel, and to understand how
Rhonda and Mary
that's
feel.
right.
Listen.
Look, it goes all the way in. It goes all the way in. And so I'm excited because it's Women's Month, and I wanted to start with the phenomenal women that I know, and you being one of them, not just because we're sisters, but the journey. And so I even tagged this boss, business, and balance, because you've done it all. You are your own boss now. You know what it means to be in the corporate world, and now you're finding balance because you are married. And
I know.
so, yes. And so let's just talk about it, Dee. You are currently the CEO of DC Global, and you've had quite the journey to get to DC Global. So if you were to talk about in phases your road to DC Global, what would you say were some of the stop points that got you to DC Global?
So it has been quite the journey. So first of all, I think when I think about my career, I've literally been in my leadership career 20 years.
Yeah.
And most of which have been in the financial sector, right? I'd say that my journey started at 600 Lafayette in Brooklyn, New York, at Brooklyn Tabernacle Deliverance Center, which was my family's church, where my grandfather, my paternal grandparents were the leader. And it was, when I think about everything we do today from a community aspect in starting social enterprises, I think back to, my childhood and say, oh my goodness, we didn't have a language for it then, but that's what that was. And one thing my family believed in addition to serving and giving, was working and literally training up a child. And so honestly, my first job was at 14 in the accounting office. And I remember having the option to, try out the summer camp and try out some of the other areas, and the travel agency and the printing press. And it was actually with a little woman in the accounting department named Sister Carrie, who was getting ready for an audit, that I was like, actually, I want to help her. I want to do this. And I continued to do that until my grandfather passed away and we were no longer a part of the ministry. And I think that eventually, got me going into intrigued with numbers and people in numbers. But it also prepared me for having a heart for people and a very young understanding about leadership.
Mm.
And because I grew up with dynamic leaders in my house and surrounded by dynamic leaders. When I think about some of who we consider on the world stage in Christendom today, these were my grandfather's friends. And so I would say that is probably the anchor point. And then I I have this joke where I tell people my first job, like legally, was as a collections rep. And then shortly after, a collections supervisor. I crack up and tell people, and I wasn't the collections rep like you forgot to pay your bill last week. It was, you are 6 months behind. We've got the codes from repossession and garnishment of wages, and really just helping to counsel people. And so fast forward, I'd say probably somewhere in the 2000s, I realized that dealing with people face to face, clients face to face, while also helping to lead teams was my jam. And so I got into retail banking, which is where I met you. And in my retail banking career, I remember having a friend who was in the retail banking industry. At the time, I was leading a call center as its director for US and Canada. And they say, hey, Wachovia is hiring branch managers. You should come on down. And I remember looking like, number one, I'd have to take a pay cut. Number two, there's too much to learn, et cetera. And I remember them saying, well, right now you're on call 24/7 and you have no balance of life. And who said that where you start is where you have to stay? And who said that your ascendance into other opportunities has to match the precedents of how they promote people today?
Mm.
Some of the best advice that I could receive, best decision, one of the best decisions I could have made, I took a leap. I became a branch manager, and I will tell you, I never looked back. Like, retail banking became the heart of who I am for a number of reasons, but largely just there was something about that sweet spot of meeting people with opportunity at that stage in their career.
Mm.
Being this hybrid of connected to bankers and tellers who sometimes were told this is as good as it can get. And there's literally a lot of pride in being a teller. Banks don't exist without them. Exactly. But that's the case when that's what you choose and you have pride in that. But some felt this is as far as I could go. And there was something about having that opportunity to have people uncover their full potential at that stage, meeting some folks coming in straight out of college, some folks turning around generational lineages of and traditions of not graduating from school. Mm-hmm. And getting them in, I would say, my space at that point. That just was the world to me. And eventually moved on into the next level of leadership, which is where I got to know you even better. As when I look back and think about it, back in 2008 and 7, there weren't women, particularly women of color, it was not a popular place to promote them in what was considered to be senior or executive leadership roles in banking. And so there's no wonder that I found myself predominantly the only, whether it was the only woman on the team, the only person of color on the team, but how I was surrounded with senior leaders of color at that stage. And I would say that was the birth of my professional career. Those were my foundational years. There is not a lesson learned, not a skill taught today that I operate within that doesn't come from that stage in my life. And I'd fast forward to say, after doing that for, I think another 6 or 7 years, Was afforded this opportunity after being kind of donned the turnaround leader in markets, which is a whole nother story, right? They love it on paper when you turn around, but they don't always want to support you with what it takes to turn around.
To turn it around.
It's a whole nother story that I'm sure we'll touch on, but was afforded this opportunity to move 800 miles away from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
To the greater Milwaukee area to serve in a similar role, but a much expanded opportunity and territory. And it was a pivotal point for me because I was also right off the cusp of a divorce. And I had also just purchased my first home. And it felt like a scary decision. It felt like a strange decision. But one thing it didn't feel like was the wrong decision.
And I think that's important for folks to understand. I know you're telling it, and it's just like, I was getting a divorce. I had just bought a new home. Oh, and by the way, I was moving 800 miles away from, everyone.
Everyone.
And yet here was this opportunity. The opportunity that came after the purchase of the new home, the one that was built, right? The one where you were picking out the cabinets, the one, right? So the one where you invested, not this prefab home, but the one that you were like, oh, I can't wait. It's almost done.
That I spent a year picking out and building. I had only been in the house. It hadn't been a year before the offer was presented to me.
Right.
Absolutely. The house I prayed for.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And prayed for because it was actually, for anybody who knows anything about law, it's a challenging thing to do to purchase a new home in the middle of a divorce.
Yes, it is.
And so, yes, and 800 miles away from anyone that I knew. So, for those who don't know me, my East Coast roots go deep, 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 deep. In fact, where I spent 34 of my years in the East Coast. And so it was rough. And I remember talking to a peer, I'd say a peer mentor. In fact, it was Bernard Noreen. I remember calling Bernard and saying, this is absurd. And who wants to move this far? And I remember him saying to me, I had no idea that you had reached such a height of experience and advancement in your career that you could select your growth opportunities based on geographical preference. I will never forget those words, right?
Mm.
And for me, it was critical because what it said to me, beyond him being significantly pithy and impacting in that way, it said to me, you're so focused on praying for the answer and the breakthrough and so determined that it has to come to fruition in the way that you mentally design it, that when the exceedingly abundantly is banging down your door, you reject it.
You can't see past what you already thought was the blessing.
That's exactly right.
What do you mean? This is a blessing. This is my brand new home.
Yes.
I spent all this time. I am moving on with my life. There's a necessary separation. God couldn't possibly be in this. Not that thing.
No, not after all of this, right? And so I said yes. And literally, one of the things, and then I ended up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in particular, and it was a turning point for my life. I accredit, my foundational years in New York as just that, my years of shaping. I accredit my Philadelphia years as my years of professional kind of growth. And they helped me find my career and who I was as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Milwaukee gifted me first and foremost with me. My time in Milwaukee was the first time that I sought out and discovered who I was underneath all the labels, the titles, and the roles. Right? I knew who Deidra was as a leader and the daughter and the worship leader and you name it. But I had no idea who Dee was and wasn't even interested. I remember sitting in what one would consider at that point in time a manager once removed development meeting with our head of banking. And I remember them saying, what do you want next? Because what's on the agenda for you is XYZ. And I remember leaving thinking, first of all, I'm supposed to be excited about that. Secondly,
yes.
Right.
And why aren't you? Don't you understand we have plans for you?
I think it was the first time I realized that I was on someone else's career path for me. Yeah. And it wasn't their fault at all. I was doing what I thought made sense. But it was the first time that I said and admitted to myself, I have no idea what I really want to do with my life.
Yeah.
And that was a gift of time, I would say. And so I think that sowed the seed for a lot.
So, I didn't want to cut you off, but you're dropping so many gems. I'm enjoying it as much as I already know most of it. But you're touching on so many profound staples in your life. You talked about New York being the shaping, and Philadelphia is where the professionalism came out, and Milwaukee being the gift of discovery. And I don't want folks to miss the piece where you said, and they thought I should be happy because that's the path that they were paving. And I was going along with it because I still didn't know who I was.
That's exactly right.
And the honesty and self-awareness that it takes to say,
yes,
just wait a minute. How did you bring yourself to terms with, I have to put a pin in it right here. Like I have to stop.
So that's a really good question. And I would say it wasn't, I tell it in minutes, but it certainly was a longer experience. I would imagine it was probably several months, right? But it started with the fact that I recall leaving that meeting excited, but then deflated. And I had to kind of pick that apart. I actually found myself in a bit of a state of depression. And I couldn't figure out, well, first of all, why was I excited? Is it that I feel like I'm not capable of what they said? Does it feel like there's more to climb and I don't think that's necessary? And why am I depressed? And I mean depressed, like struggling to get out the bed to go to this job that at that point, I didn't hate my job. And as I began to start to quiet down and spend some time with me and my Father, and by Father, I mean Christ, my creator, I would say what came to me was this, that it wasn't that I was excited about what the path was that they had laid out for me. It was that I was excited that they approved of me.
And that's real.
That's real.
That is so real. The affirmation and validation of I made it, or I'm on that path that they said that I couldn't, and this is exactly what I'm supposed, I'm going after the thing that they said that we couldn't have and that we couldn't.
Right. They approve of me. Yeah. And I'd say that was the start, because I then needed to know, why was their approval the deciding factor in my joy? And if I was only excited because they approved of me and I didn't want what I thought I was climbing for, then what exactly is it that I want?
Exactly.
And I'd say that was the moment that was the self-awareness piece. And I had to fight with myself a bit, because there was an ego war to even be able to admit to myself at 30 whatever, two things. That number one, I've been racing towards something that really wasn't what I wanted to achieve. That I didn't know really what I wanted to do. I was doing what made sense. But the other piece that I'd say was that it was hard for me to coincide that on paper, I was what people were praying for.
Yeah. Yeah.
House, a rental, a car, 6 figures, more than enough. And I wasn't happy. And to be able to connect and sit within, I am grateful, yet it is not enough. And it has nothing to do with resources.
It has everything to do with purpose.
I had never explored the idea or the question of what my purpose was. Yeah. Up until this point in life, I had been very focused on, what do I need to accomplish? What do I need to achieve? And I'll be honest with you, I think I'll never forget this. You know, I've always wanted a comfortable living. I don't think my ambition for certain roles and making a certain living hit into gear until I reached an age that my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who had been my predominant caretaker most of my life, like I can't remember, right, a day in which while living at home, I wasn't living in her home. I'll never forget, and I know she won't mind me sharing this because I tell this testimony at times. I can recall my family making a call to me saying, hey, grandma's not doing well. And it's because, you know, her income has changed because she's on a fixed income and she didn't order one of her medicines because she didn't want to disturb the family and be a bother. And exactly. And I remember my heart shattering. And I remember being a branch manager and being invited to the Pennsylvania Women's Conference with Emilio Cooper, right? Who at the time was my district leader, actually, no, area president. And you couldn't tell me nothing, but that's a whole separate story. Susie Orman was one of the speakers. And I remember Susie Orman had a segment where she said, I want you to write down what you want to achieve for your family and what it's going to take for you to achieve. And I'll never forget, my first thing I wrote down was, I want to make enough money so that my grandmother doesn't even have to think about what she doesn't have. It's already in her account. Because the woman who put me in any stage in my life in a position to never have to wonder if I was going to have, I want her to know how I felt. Yeah. She was raising me. And I will tell you that up until much later in my journey, that was my drive. That my drive for success was to provide for others. And then of course you get addicted, right, to achievement and success. And then somebody tells you what you can't do. And so your point, then it's, okay. And so I would say that. And so I never stopped to think about, well, what's your purpose in all of this? Because none of that was wrong. None of it was.
That's what I want folks to hear. Folks think that that you're suffering or struggling. No, you can have success and still outside of purpose.
Totally. We see people do it every day.
And that is the awakening, right?
Yes.
It is it says the day that you discover why you were born is the day that you began living.
I could not agree more. And I will tell you and I say this emphatically today to people, there is no way that you can be on a journey of self at any level and not stumble upon and trip into a well of what you were called on this earth to do.
And then the decision to do or not to do, right?
That's right.
The to be or not to be. Yes, come on, sis.
Which shows up over and over. Because a lot of times we think, and I'll be the first to say, I swore that once I had my, Jacob's experience, my wrestle, and I finally say yes, that I'll go this direction, that was it. And it was just going to, your decision to have to choose purpose is a repeated cycle in your life.
Yes. It has levels. It has levels.
Level, right? And because people assume that with ascension, right, it shifts. It does not, because how your purpose is manifested and executed changes at every level.
Yes, it does.
There's new risk. There's new challenge. You literally are starting afresh at a next point. It's like literally going through grade school, right? Mm-hmm. And, does it mean that because you show up at grade 12 and have no clue what, the statistics, teacher is sharing and saying, does that mean that you didn't successfully pass grade 11? No, it means you have a new decision and a new choice and a new challenge to show up.
Come on.
Your life, for your growth. And Michelle, it hasn't stopped. It hasn't, because once that happened, the journey started to drastically shift. And
I guess led to a different type of door.
It led to a different door. I started looking at the work I did in a very different way.
Yeah.
And I no longer felt comfortable leading the area in which I was leading.
Yeah.
And I went from, I'd easily baseline it for those listening to say, I think what I had become obsessed with as a banking leader was people and the gap between how they show up and their peak performance potential, right? I became obsessed with it. And everything else really just was pieces in the puzzle, right? And how you make your goals and design a plan and teaching them all, that was pieces of the puzzle. What I eventually became obsessed with was how people exist within the spaces.
Yes.
That accomplish their goals.
Yes.
Right. And so that became next, and what their experience was and how they processed through challenges and how they were able to feel a sense of belonging so that they could show up in an authentic way that was most authentic, if you will, as you could in corporate America, because that's a whole nother story. And I eventually moved into diversity and inclusion, which was a hard, again, another challenge, because I was raised professionally that you never become the cost center. You always become
right. You are part of the revenue, or you are part of the problem. Right. And that's how you are trained in retail. You are trained. Yes. You are either part of the revenue or you are part of the problem. So
it is so true. And I will tell you that I went to some of my same leaders and mentors that helped raise me professionally, and they were like, you are crazy. Don't you do it. And, when I was a child, I spoke as a child.
And I thought as a child.
Right. And at a certain point, it's because now the door had been opened to purpose. And so now I had this other entity and voice in spirit that now has life in me.
I don't want to lose that you have made two references as to how you process and come to your decision making. Like you've made leaps. I know you're describing them as, and I was walking along and I just made this career change. And then suddenly, but it's not. You have been very thoughtful. You've been very prayerful. You made mention that you sought sound counsel. And I just want you to pause to share with listeners that the intentionality behind I am going to seek sound counsel, not co-signers.
Yeah.
I am going to unlock this purpose and then have that quality time with the creator, because who better knows
Yes.
the purpose. And so talk about what it took to create those disciplines so that you wouldn't lean to your own understanding.
You know, that's a really good point. I really have to, I think, accredit my upbringing and the fact that, you know, and maybe this is just a byproduct of being raised by a pastor, or, and I would even add my mother to that, just counsel. It's funny that therapy wasn't normalized, but counsel was, right? And that there was no shame in making sure that all of your decisions were made being touched by a number of trusted individuals who had more to offer you in multiple areas than you could offer yourself. And so that was ingrained, I think, in me. And I would say my mentors, you know, I put you on that list, created an environment where me coming to them to process was not only encouraged, but welcomed.
Yes.
And that even when it was a truth-telling moment, I didn't leave feeling shamed or beat, right? And I might say, ouch. And so I think that as much as I had to make the decision to make these intentional, you know, modalities or steps within my decision-making, my mentors and leaders in my life are equal responsible. Because, and so I think that might help somebody as well. Cause I don't know, you know, I don't know if I don't know if mentors do it like we used to, like literally, I don't know that people have what I had when I almost feel like I was a last breed of things in the professional environment, and how I didn't ask any of my mentors to be my mentors.
Right.
They saw a need.
Yes.
And it was my job to recognize what value and what a gem I was given. And so I responded accordingly.
Yes.
Right. And I knew my place, which, you know, some might be like, what do you mean? You know, you got to understand relationships and dynamics. And so there were times that I would just come to sit under, right? I didn't want a whole lot. I just needed to sit under. I needed to watch. And so I also watched my mentors seek counsel, and they never held that back from me.
Right.
And so that became ingrained in my process. And did I struggle along the way, right, with confidence and vulnerability and, you know, authenticity throughout it? Absolutely. And I think that tons of fight, but that was why I would utilize the conversation with them, because they were the safe space for me to be and say things like, but I'm afraid I'll fail, but I don't know nothing about D&I.
Right. Right. And we're like, yeah, but you do.
Right. Or, you know, or even I can recall sharing with you and a number of others to say, I don't know what it is to have less than, I can't remember what it's like to have less than 50 people reporting to me. And now I'm gonna have to share an assistant. I mean, let's talk real talk, right?
It is real talk, because what folks don't realize is that you also have to learn that when you no longer have an assistant, someone who is, and if you don't have one, then you won't understand. But when you get one, and you get a good one,
Oof.
they are your left and sometimes your right hand, because
Absolutely.
you're moving at such a clip that we had assistants who knew our banking needs, who were scheduling all kinds of appointments because they had to fit it in your demanding calendar. And so now you're shifting to, so, okay, this becomes my responsibility. And for those who say, or are listening, who are like, who believe this to be more of a bragging. It is not. It is what happens when to whom much is given, much is required. So you are given some help because you're required. Your skill set is needed in other facets. It is not needed for your calendar. You're being pulled on in so many other directions.
Absolutely.
That you have to just make a decision. And so, yeah, I
I
remember.
mean, it was tough. And you know what's interesting, and I don't even know if this is where the conversation is supposed to go. I remember doing so much vacillating about the decision because ultimately it was, I was afraid to fail. I was afraid of what others would think about shifting from, what was a very public role, right, that had, the glitz and the glam to what was equal in not only importance, but weighted, but what was considered a supporting role. And I get into the role. And yep, you had to share an admin. At the time, I didn't have any direct reports. But yet, my proximity to the CEO was closer, and my responsibility was for the entire organization within my function. And so I was trying to put connect the dots, right? And say, so when I was over here, the closest that I got to CEO in daily conversation may have been the head of banking.
Right.
Once a month. Here, I might get an email on a Thursday night saying you've got to be on a call by 5 a.m. because you've got to help draft a communication for, a NBC interview that our CEO is going to do regarding inclusion. But you got to do all of this and wear that weight without a fraction of the support.
Exactly.
That you had. And so I'd say that started even a new relationship with me with what I was obsessed with, because I then became curious. And don't get me wrong, I think that revenue drivers need all the help they can get because trust you me, it is work. But it was interesting to me that the individuals who are responsible for creating the infrastructure and culture in which you sustain the employees who drive revenue, not only were they considered supporting characters, they got a fraction of the support and resource. So then how much resources were really going into creating environments for people to thrive?
Mm-hmm. So we were focused on revenue and not nearly as much around reputation. And that's where the imbalance came.
Yes.
It was, what are we generating? What else do they need to generate? And you just need to give them whatever they're asking for, regardless of the environment, regardless of the implosions that were happening before the eruptions, right? And however often the door was revolving, it was, okay, just go find another one, just go find another one. Or better yet, let's just start creating them. Just however the cycle was going to go, it was always referenced as the beast.
Yes. And indeed it was. And I would say here came purpose knocking again, like, so what you gonna do about it? Because by this point, I am now also awakened to the self-awareness journey and discovery journey. So this is consistently going on. And I am now, so now there's a part of me who used to assimilate and conform. And now there's a part of me that's got questions and needs answers. And now, well, how do we solution? And I became obsessed. And this was I'd say people think that the social unrest in the last year was the height of diversity and inclusion. I think D&I has had a number of, booms, if you will, right? But I'd say 2000 14, 15 was right around the point where chief diversity officer roles were starting to become a bit popular. And there was transition in our organization. And so the role was open, and there was some question, here we go again, right? You know, this would be a nice opportunity. We'd like you to grow into, et cetera. And I said, you know, that's nice, but here's what I think is actually going to solve the challenge. And it's not within this space. This space is needed. And in short, you know, not to bore everyone, but I'd really gotten a really good vision. And this is not something that I kind of just rebelled off on my own and came up with. So going back to this process around decision-making and creating agency and, you know, engaging, I come up with what I thought was an insightful revelation about what was missing between process and execution and success. And I engaged a number of senior executive leaders who all said, you are absolutely right. Who all then said, we'll help you build your presentation, build your case. And I'm talking heads of wealth departments, right? And, you know, and you know, like I know, that's not an easy feat. And we put together what I know would have changed the game. And at the core of it, really all we were saying to the banking industry, and particularly starting with ours, was this. Once upon a time, we taught leaders how to be leaders. Yes. And once upon a time, we recruited people from high school and college with the thought in mind that when we hired them, they'd be on a journey with us into retirement. And that we would provide them with on and off ramp opportunities in which they could explore their leadership capabilities. And at every interval, we would ensure that they had a support mechanism that would help them shine and thrive, right? We forgot how to do that. Now we hire for function. Now we hire and promote for function. And if you do this, not only will you shift your experience, you'll also shift the number of Black, Brown, Asian, and additional other ethnic groups who are able to thrive in your organization. And what I will tell you is we presented it, and I quote, the words were said by this particular organization's head of HR, who is no longer head of HR. You are absolutely right. This is the answer. That said, I can't in good conscience fund skunk work at this stage in our D&I journey. So I think the activities are great, and figure out how to do them without needing the scope and the shaping and the infrastructure. And so long story short, I remember again feeling deflated and challenged. But then this little voice said, who said that I gave you that vision for this house?
Yes. 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 And that is where people need to hear clearly. That I need every listener, everyone watching. The vision he gave doesn't mean that the execution or the implementation of execution.
That's right.
For the place you're in.
That's right. It does not always mean, and for me, it ties back to this notion that I think I have to consistently learn, but I definitely recognize it when much sooner. And that is, we cannot consistently hold on to what we think the outcome of any circumstance and situation. Because when we're so tightly connected to the outcome, we're in the way. We're in the way. And I will tell you, less than 30 days after that is the very first time that I got the insight and vision to start my own firm. I tell people this all the time. I am the person who would have bet you $1 million against the fact that I would ever be an entrepreneur. If there were ever a Kool-Aid drinker who was in the book of Kool-Aid drinkers, the biggest Kool-Aid drinker, I was it. But purpose, right? Because purpose doesn't always make sense.
No.
It doesn't.
No.
It doesn't always make sense. And a lot of times we're trying to add a human lens to it so that it does. But it doesn't always make sense. And
convincing others. I need you to believe this. I need you to believe that this is what he's telling me. I need you to believe that this is where I'm supposed to be. And you're drawing people in to believe with you because you're looking for this support.
You need the validation. And what I will say is I am thankful. And would I say I didn't need the validation at that time? I'd say I preferred it. I think though that I advised folks that this is what I was doing versus, and of course, again, my trusted tribe and board of directors, I'd say, what do you, am I crazy? Right? Because I could do that with them in the right spirit, knowing I was in a good space. But that's how DC Global Group was born. It was born out of creating a vision that would really unlock potential for any organization and any leader, because we all have potential that's not tapped into yet. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it came up, and I also realized the difference that very quickly on that I thought it was diversity and inclusion that I wanted to do, when actually what I was obsessed with was what's technically the culture. I'm obsessed with the DNA of an organization. I'm obsessed with what the DNA is made up of. I could typically not care. I could care less how we got there, because does anybody ever question, DNA within a human being?
No.
Right. And so I really don't care how we got there. And I think that's the difference between our firm and a lot of other firms is I'm going to tell you, listen, you're challenged and your diversity strategy isn't working because you made billions of dollars being a organization who's got bigotry and racism at its root cause. Why are we going to try to figure out how you got there? You made the $1 billion.
Right.
Stop trying to be something you're not. I don't need you to not be what you naturally are. I need you to acknowledge who you are and realize that you don't want to create the experience of who you naturally are as an organization. And my obsession with individual leaders and them having a journey of self, and organizations and them having a journey of self kind of met. And so that started the DC Global Group journey and my journey as an entrepreneur, which I knew absolutely nothing about. And when I absolutely nothing about. And I left my organization on amazing terms, because how you leave a thing is how you start a thing. And in fact, I remember giving them 90 days notice and people were like, are you crazy? Why would you give them so much notice? Why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I?
Exactly.
Why wouldn't I want to leave them in the best position possible? Why wouldn't I want to sow that energy in? And so I left May of 2018, started DC Global Group the same month. And here we are today, coming up on our 3rd year anniversary, which seems insane to me. It seems insane to me. And it has been a crazy journey. And I have learned so much. And I feel like the lessons just don't stop.
Well, it's interesting that because I somehow I conceptually thought that you started before 2018, only because you were at a round table with me in November of 2016.
Yes.
I was making some decisions.
Yes.
And so it's interesting to hear that the very thing you ultimately began
Yes.
doing is literally what we were doing around that table around. So what is it going to take and what is it going to look like? And let's refine this mission statement and how are we going to, and all of the activities that all
Yes.
took place in 2016.
Yes. And I had no idea that it was, I will tell you that that work is probably the most requested work of our organization today. And what's hilarious is it's the stuff, I remember the first request for strategic, basically infrastructure and kind of foundation work, planning. And I was like, no, I typically do that for my boards and I do that for friends, and I really don't. And one business was like, listen, how much, etc. And I did it, and I ran from it. I would say for the next year and a half before I finally was like, okay, God, I get that this is a role. This is the space that you want me to play in organizations, and the top requested, and because oftentimes I'm surprised at how many leaders feel unsupported in their planning process for an organization, no matter the size.
Mm-hmm.
And that in as much as they don't want to hire a firm to outsource the process because they want to own it, they also want an experience themselves that feels like a safe space. And that's what I do, is I literally say, no, we're going to do this together. I'll sit at your table with you. We'll have some sessions by ourselves. I'll walk you, your team, and your board through it. But this will be a collaborative process. And it dawned on me that I am what I wish I had, and what I know my mentors wish they had, as leaders. And the fact that I'm their executive partner.
And that is critical in any organization.
Yes.
The most folks think that you need the rabbit, and I've always called them that, or the maverick, the person that can go and hunting. We need
Yes.
to go get the hunter. We need the person that's going to be out there. We need someone that's going to chase it down. And meanwhile, the person that actually has to put all of these pieces together is going, well, hold on.
Yeah, that's right.
Hold on. You're ready to go hunting, ill-equipped, right? Is it for a bear? Is it, what are you going to kill, right? And so we're just like, unleash, let them go. Meanwhile, the strategist, the thought leader is saying,
right.
Where is there room to say time out? Where is there room to say that may not be the best decision because it's going to come back? And you're right. Those rooms, when you want to say pause on revenue, you might as well had said, I want to quit because you just don't call for a pause on revenue generation.
This is so true. And you hit an interesting point. I share with every leader in every room that every team and every relationship have to have the balance of what I like to call the doers and the thinkers. The world is made up. We all heavily lean towards one way or the other. And it doesn't mean that some of us can't operate in both successfully, but one of those areas are innate to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it is important. I always take a look at a team when I'm working with an organization to say, how many doers is it made up of? How many thinkers? And what is their leader? Are they hiring people who are like them? Are they hiring an environment that will keep them balanced? Because then my job becomes helping them recognize that. And so the doers, because I remember one CEO being a little offended, like, I'm thoughtful as well. Of course you are. You wouldn't have gotten here if you weren't. But your natural, innate ability, for him in particular, was that he was a doer. To which I shared with him and said, no matter what thought leader process I'm playing in this room for you, I too am a doer. Doers are exactly as you say, they're the mavericks. They are the ones who can't wait for the target to be released. Where are we going? How fast can we get there? And how many bodies are we catching on the way? And where do we catch our reward and collect when we come back, right? That's because, and here's the deal. Here's what I explained to him, that why that wasn't a bad thing. Because doers are motivated by action. It's not that they're necessarily motivated by control. They're motivated by action.
Right.
So anytime things feel like they're moving too slow, they get uncomfortable. They don't feel of value. But the problem is, if they don't understand who they are innately, they don't consciously make sure that they engage the other side of their brain to kind of do this checklist, which is where the thinkers come in. Thinkers are typically the people who get on the nerves of everyone in any high-paced environment team meeting. They are the ones that say, I've just got one more question. They're the ones when you think you're supposed to fly by slide 2 through 6. Wait a minute, can we just go back to slide 4? And they're slightly irritated by leaders who are unbalanced doers, because thinkers, it's not that they don't know how to take action. What they're motivated by is accuracy and success. And in their mind, success is ensured by making sure there's a methodical process that has a thorough system that's going to ensure the success that everyone agreed that they wanted to accomplish up front.
Yes. And
I don't know how we got to
I will add, and they don't want to do it again. See, that's my pet peeve. I don't want to revisit this. So if we do it right the first time,
yes,
I don't want to revisit this. I want to do it and be done. Yes.
That's right. And both sets have, both have a low tolerance for failure. They just view the threat of failure coming in very different ways. I don't know how we got all the way over here.
Well, that's because that's who we are, right? So I'm watching the time and I'm like, I can't believe we're almost there. But you've described so intently the journey of, moving from being in business for someone else to the discovery of who you are and identifying purpose and watching how everything worked together, the good, the bad, the ugly, the triumphs to get you to DC Global. And so where do you see DC Global going as the boss? Right? You've done the business, now you're the boss. So where's it going?
Let me tell you. So, it's hard to see completely where it's going, which may sound crazy, right? There's vision. I think where I am and where I want to be, where I'm most concerned and focused today is the fact that we have been blessed and the plate is full. But what I want to be is in a position that I am helping to set the strategic visionary course for how DC Global Group continues to support organizations in such an intimate way that the future probably holds me not really being the one doing it.
Wow.
But making sure that I have the capacity to build up another generation of individuals who are culture gladiators. Right? I can only impact so many. And I have other consultants and partners. Is there a team? There is. But I remember finding this out maybe in my second year when I was ready to start to expand. And I was dealing with a business coach who was intimately involved with the community. And he said, Deirdre, I got some good news for you and I got some bad news. I was like, oh crap, what's going on? He said, the good news is your clients love you. The bad news is they love you. You have created such a niche experience because we Olivia Pope these organizations. Okay, there is a method to the madness and science of the fact that I am not marketed very like it's a science. It's not a miss. I pay very close attention to the fact that the organizations and leaders that I support seem to like the exclusivity of it all. And that's exactly what we do. We Olivia Pope organizations, but we Deirdre Kendrix them, we DC Global Group them. We are really, DC Global Group has always been about a group of experts supporting a group of organizations to the point of transformation that's sustainable. That has always been the mission. And so it's never been about me. And so now that we've tested, we've tried it, and it's clearly there's a way in that we do things today that not any other organization is doing it. I need to make sure that that goes to scale. I need to make sure that we're just not impacting 7 a month or 10 a month. How do we get to a point where we're impacting 20? Because I also want to make sure that they don't lose that value. And so I'd say the growth of DC Global Group is to stay right in the center of where we are, but to maximize the number of organizations that we touch without diminishing the experience. Because, I can get choked up. Michelle, there is nothing like getting the letter from, a manager who you had 2 minutes with in an organization, but says, I was going to resign before you started this work with my organization. Not only am I not going to resign, I just got informed that I'm going to get a promotion and I'm going to get my first executive opportunity. Previously, there were no women and there were no people of color, right? And so I care about how people experience their leadership journey. And one would say, so are you only focused on leaders? Every one of us is a leader. And part of the depth that I actually do want to add is how do I get to the more grounded frontline workers to shift their mindset into thinking with an entrepreneurial mindset of, you don't have to necessarily have your own business or choose corporate America. What you need to know is you are the entity, and whatever seat you sit in, you run this journey. And you partner with an organization to align on purpose, on outcome, and on path. And do you all have the same mission to make that happen? But you are the entity. It is so important to me that people, in particular, people of color, have a better experience than I did on my leadership journey.
Yeah.
And that they are able, and I can't reach them. And here's, if I call a thing, I could easily be a leadership coach and impact them that way. The reality is most of our folks don't get afforded the opportunity to have a leadership coach that's sponsored by the organization. So they have to be able to afford it out of pocket. And the amount of leaders that I would have to coach in order to sustain a lifestyle, in order to do that, would impact how I coach them. And so my way of supporting them is to come in from the top. Come in from the top and help their CEOs and their leadership team look at leadership so differently. Not them, but leadership differently, that they show up differently as leaders, creating a different space in how people experience the organization. And I don't think I'll ever get tired of that work. I'll just want to find better ways that we can reach more. And so I'd say that's the future. And right now, I'm just trying to figure out what that scale looks like. Because what I'm learning in the entrepreneurial journey, it is never ending evolution and iteration.
Indeed. Indeed.
The business plan is never set. And if I be super candid, right, I'm in between operation managers and executive assistants. And so I am spending all the time doing the things that aren't the most efficient and having to make the decision. So is my life right now about, getting in bed at midnight? It is. Do I still have to make sure I'm consciously aware that I have a spouse who I have to give quality time to? I do. And for me, that looks like different things. And I'm fortunate, I'll emphasize fortunate, in the fact that he himself is such a supportive entrepreneur that he gets my plight. And so there are roles that he plays in our household that I don't know that any other husband may easily play. And so, because if you let me, I'll work from 7 a.m. to midnight.
Mm-hmm.
When he says it's dinner time, it's dinner time. And so for me, no matter what thought I might lose, no matter where I'm at in the presentation, this is important. This is the balance. And I need him to feel as valued as I feel. And so this is where I shut it down. And when we have dinner out, it is dinner hour. There are no phones. I mean, there might be phones, but there's no work at the table. Do I work on the week? I don't work on the weekends anymore. Weekend time. I mean, I may do a Sunday night situation, but for the most part, weekend time is family time. Even if he's doing something else, I don't work because I still owe him for me being present enough whenever he is here and around me. And so that's always a learning conversation, but I wouldn't trade any of it. I wouldn't trade one exhausting night. I wouldn't trade the days, I think I've cried more in the last 3 weeks over just being overwhelmed and frustrated with what my human capacity is. I wouldn't trade any of it for the impact and the joy of being your own boss. It's expensive, and I mean that in mostly more ways than financially. But the reward, oh my.
I so love you, and thank you for being the first of the phenomenal women that I am going to be hosting this month, and for being the first on Michelle Speaks Real Talk segment. Woo! DC Global, Deidra Kendrix, you will see more coming her way. Please tell them how to find you on your social media outlets, your website.
Yes. So right now, dcglobalgroup.com is where you can find us. You can also find me on my personal page on Facebook as Deidra Kendrix. It's a hybrid page. I have no secrets. What you see is what you get. We are also on LinkedIn as DC Global Group. And we have some exciting news that we just released as a teaser. So I won't give all the deets, but soon you will be able to find us at coffeeandgrace.com and Coffee and Grace at all of your major social media. Wherever you would go to look at anything, we'll be there, and more about that. But what I will say about Coffee and Grace is a teaser to close. is here we are responding to purpose again. I will say DC Global Group is about a group of leaders and subject matter experts supporting a group of businesses. Coffee and Grace is about me figuring out how to connect humans to humans again. And so I think I'm excited about the vision and some of the modalities and channels in which we'll get that vision going. I'll make sure you're amongst the first to know and be. The vision grows, and here we are. So thank you for having me. You mean the world to me and my family, and you're such a huge part of this journey. Like when I think back, there's not a part of my what I call adult leadership journey that I don't really remember you not being in. And so God would have it that I met you at, an all regional branch manager meeting and said, first of all, who is the woman with the preaching tone, the bad shoes, and this effortless swag, to becoming your mentee, to becoming your little sister, to becoming your friend and sister, to you marrying my husband and I. And I am grateful sometimes he gives us lifelong bonds, and I am grateful that he's one that he allowed for me to be for you, because I don't take that secret space lightly.
Well, neither do I, and more to come. Looking forward to Coffee and Grace. We could be here another hour just talking about Coffee and Grace, because
hour. Stay tuned.
But it is on its way. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying plugged in with us. You know how we do here at Michelle Speaks. We give him all the glory because he has established this platform, and we're ever grateful for you staying with us. Look her up, not just because she's my sister, but because she's a phenomenal woman doing phenomenal things. You will see DC Global coming to all social media platforms near you. God bless you, and thank you.
It's time for Michelle Speaks. Come get your inspiration. Michelle Speaks. Don't worry about your destination. Michelle Speaks. Learn to be a better you. Michelle.